the transformative financing program that also provides cities with the capacity building required in order to do screening for their priorities, identify which projects they need to invest in, and also connecting them with the investors and the financiers based on their needs and the gaps that has been identified.
Thank you. And I heard bankable projects, monitoring and evaluation, and the data to enable these bankable projects. And this maybe takes me to a big dynamic in the region, because we have a lot of new developments happening. We have a massive population and economic growth taking place. And we also have the existing cities, which are often taking the brunt of changes happening in our environment. So maybe a question to you, Riz. How do you see it from a planning perspective? Do you think that the existing cities are able to really tap into the bankable projects given the amount of financing going into the new cities?
Thanks for having me and for being here, and thanks for everyone who's joined us today. I think they can and they should, and I think it is critical that we make sure any new project that is put on the table is leveraging the existing cities and the existing infrastructure, the existing transport networks, and building on that rather than sort of starting afresh, starting from scratch. And that's partly just going back to the dynamics of cities and how historically they've evolved. Cities have evolved organically, naturally, and that's why, you know, if you look at cities in the past, they started at a certain point and then they grew from that point in all sorts of direction, but they've always been connected. The growth has always been connected to the origin or the sort of the birthplace of that city. And we're doing now, well, urban development and has sort of changed, you know, over the years, and today we have island developments, which is quite costly, not only to the environment, but socially and economically. And obviously this applies to transport infrastructure and, you know, other parts of the city. And that's why I think it is important to go back to the original sort of dynamic of cities and their evolution, to go back to the growth, the natural growth that is driven by real demand, and focus on fulfilling those demands, the basic needs of existing populations. And therefore, yes, it's sort of in a short answer to your question, yes, those projects that we're looking at today must be also looking at existing cities and optimizing their operations. And I'll conclude with this last point. When we advise on sustainable urban planning, we always start by looking at what can we avoid building by leveraging what already exists. And only after we've done that, we start then thinking about, okay, we've optimized what we have. Now let's think about what else is there that we really have to build for. Because obviously the best, you know, way to save money and carbon emissions and protect the environment and all the other benefits we talk about in sustainability is not to build, right? Essentially, obviously I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't be building. We do need to build because populations grow and so on and so forth. But the best way is to optimize what we have before we build new, and not park what we have or you know, leave behind what's already there and build completely new in a completely new place, almost island developments. I'll pause here, but I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about that.
No, but that's an amazing answer, because I love the history of cities. And the next question will be to you, Savina. I want to ask about how cities can tap into the international space, learn from it, and contribute. But before that, I want to give a quick anecdote of my city, Cairo, to inform the discussion. Because Cairo grew around the Nile as a very dense development. And then as we started building in the adjacent deserts, it started really growing massively. I remember my high school was 4 kilometers away, my university was 40 kilometers away, and then my parents moved in the different direction and I had a 70-kilometer commute. And as the weather is heating, it becomes even more difficult to not use air-conditioned travel to get there. So I really appreciate what can we avoid building, which is what happens in Alexandria that has natural borders and thus needs to go up, but faces the challenges, for instance, of flooding, which is becoming a regular thing and only going to become worse in the future. So amidst these challenges, because remember, when I was a kid, we were about half of the population that we were now, almost. In this context, what can the cities of Cairo or Alexandria or other cities from the region, from North Africa, from the Middle East, learn from the international experience? What do they need to bring for COP and what can they take from COP?
Thank you for this question. This is one of the key things that my organization is trying to do, to really curate a set of solutions and make them available to cities. And working with organizations such as the Global Covenant of Mayors, which is one of the founders of ICSI and is on my board. We're working really closely with them because the theory goes, we represent engineers. My organization is trying to mobilize engineers, prepare them to actually implement sustainability, resilience, and climate action. But we need to really be matched with those with the demand. So in this case, city policymakers and those are trying to really implement and in need of solutions. So one of the things I'm doing then, I said that I curate this set of case studies and solutions. So for example, we have a report series called the Climate Resilient Infrastructure Report Series, where we really present case studies. And I think the value of case studies and solutions is when there is sufficient detail in the case study to really understand how the solution was implemented, what you learned, what worked and didn't work as well. You know, you kind of also need to learn from what didn't work. I'm not advocating that there is a one set of solution which is the silver bullet for all cities. You know, obviously it needs to be adapted to context and challenges to specific cities, but having that sort of curated set of solutions implemented around the world, it's a very helpful starting point and avoids cities reinventing the wheel.
This leads me to think about national adaptation plans and maps. And what's the role that these policy roadmaps can play? What is the value for countries in the MENA region to invest heavily in them and to take them forward? And this is an open question to whoever wants to proceed.
Go for it.
Should I jump in? Okay. So I think definitely the effort that is being put into the National Adaptation Plan, but also the support that countries are getting from the UNFCCC is fantastic. But the biggest question is, and I think that's what's bringing us into this point around infrastructure, accessibility, commuting, the impact of heat waves, the impact of flooding, to what extent that is causing disruption to our daily lives, but not only daily lives, but also the quality of living. So when we speak about heat waves, it might be affecting, for example, the current infrastructure, when we speak about railways and the expansion of it and how it's disrupting travel. But at the same time, it's disrupting the quality of living, health sector, it's affecting our human bodies. And there is all of these big questions of where does that all sit? It sits within cities. So if the national adaptation plans cannot be translated into actions on the ground, then there is a very big question mark that we need to raise. And that's why we believe that our role as a city network, but also we are here, and by the way, just to mention, it's our first time to be at the MENA Climate Week. So we are really glad that we are reaching out to, I would say, another range of cities that we would like to bring them on board in that journey, learning from other cities. So next week, for example, we are organizing the European Urban Resilience Forum, where we have over 300 cities coming together, just exchanging knowledge and sharing lessons. Because when you learn lessons from peers, it's a completely different story than when I come and speak on behalf of someone else. But going back to your point, Hijazi, I think the very critical element here for implementing indices on the ground is to be honest with ourselves and identify exactly what are the barriers that we have, what are the challenges in order for us to be able to implement successful and bankable projects. The first barrier is definitely an economic barrier. So if we cannot monitor the performance and the scalability of adaptation financing at the local level, then we cannot really move on from this funding gap. And that is associated with a lot of elements. If we speak about the MENA region, it's completely diverse and it's completely changing, and the level of dynamics is extreme. So understanding that element of the dependency, the context, the confidentiality restrictions, and this lack of unified and agreed, let's say, impact and indicators between the different NDCs is something that needs to be considered. So a standardized solution is not going to work. We need to go localized, and we need to find identified local solutions. The second barrier is definitely the institutional barrier. The misalignment between the different levels of government, local, regional, national, this is something that definitely, again, it varies from one country to the other and from one region, or part of the region, if we call sub-regions. So this lack of integration of policies and framework does reflect on the gap of the technical capacities that we have on the ground. So how are we analyzing this pathway of decision-making vertically and horizontally in order to be able to communicate these risks and be able to address them in the right way? And then I'll just end up with the element of the governance and the social barriers, so the economic values of these different projects, and how we can get on board the private sector in order to fill in the gaps with the different financing and the implementation of projects.
Well, I really liked your prompt to let's be honest about the barriers. And maybe here I'll ask to the engineers in the room, what are the honest barriers that you face in achieving your dreams from a design perspective?
I think as a planner, I would, well, just on the national adaptation plans, I think these are very important instruments that can help us understand the specific issues of the different contexts within, for the different cities across the region. As was already said on the panel, we are one region, but our cities have some common challenges around resilience, but they have also some very different ones. Because when we look at the challenges from resilience, from the resilience perspective, I think the answer to those will differ depending not just on the challenge itself, but also about the governance model of each of our cities. As mentioned, different levels of governance, and these are very different across different cities across our region. Even the setup of our economies across the region is also very different, and therefore when we talk about financing projects, I think there are different levers to use depending on which city you're looking at, even if the challenge is the same. So I think understanding the details and the context will help us first identify the most critical challenges, but then also be able to sort of create bespoke responses to those solutions, leveraging the very specific context of each city. We talk a lot about private funding and partnerships and so on, which obviously is very, very important. But we also know that a lot of our cities, well, a lot of cities in the region depend purely on government funding, and most development in those cities is driven by government funding. And therefore, and I'm not saying this is right or wrong, I'm just describing a fact, and therefore, some of the challenges that cities face, but to get projects to be sort of bankable and getting private investors to support those projects might not exist in these cities where it's predominantly government-funded projects. That's just a very simple example, and there are lots of those examples that mean different cities can respond to the different challenges from resilience perspective through different mechanisms, different action plans, different tools and levers to others. So I think going back to national adaptation plans, I think those are very important tools because they help each city understand its own challenges, but also its own opportunities and develop its own mechanisms to respond to these challenges. So it's very, very important, I think.
I love the role that data and the importance of it to understand, be it the challenges or help the projects come up, plays. I love your final statement of that the national level, through the National Adaptation Plan, can serve the local level, which is going to get a big stage this year at COP28 through actions such as the Local Climate Action Summit, to realize their local needs. And maybe in the last couple of moments of our panel, we would like to open the floor to any questions from the audience, if anybody are interested, but also if some of the panelists want to intervene. Any questions from the audience? I see a hand raised there. Do I see a hand raised there? I do see a hand raised there, yes.
There's another one over here.
Can we get her a mic, please? Is there another hand for a follow-up question? I think we can have space for another one. I see a second hand there in the middle. Please, ma'am, go ahead.
Do you hear me? Okay, thank you very much for this interesting and informative panel discussion. My name is Mona Khalaqi from WHO. I had some comments and questions regarding of course, we had a panel also on the temperature and urban heat as well in the on the first day with Dr. Nuha, and we had this discussion of impact of temperature on health. And I want to know if in your plans, and I'm sure in the adaptation plans there are considerations on that, of the materials that can reduce the temperature absorption, which helps the cooling from the roads or even the structure for providing health to the citizens. First, this one. And there are examples of in our region, I know cities that were built in the past and kept with like clay-based structures that were cooling naturally in the past, or like the other structures. As well as recently there are like instead of also cement-based because of the water consumption is too much. Sorry, it's taking too long, but I just want to give some perspective. And also recently on the roads, using light color instead of dark colors and things like that, that I'd like to know your opinions on that. On the adaptation and resilience, I wanted to ask about the consideration on the access to healthcare facilities. Are they being considered in the planning? And while also the healthcare facilities themselves need to be in their structure, infrastructure need to be resilient. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we can take all of the questions at once. So we had a second question from a gentleman in the middle.
Hi. Sorry, hi. This is on. Thanks again for the lively presentation. My name's Nick. Can you hear me better now? Okay.
Can you please speak up? We cannot hear you.
How about this?
Excellent. Go for it.
All right. Thank you for the lively presentation. My name is Nicholas Johnson. I'm with Climate 4Cs, an ESG assessment company. I just wanted to follow up on something that Dr. Nuha said related to TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. I've heard about this playing in the private sector, sort of helping large organizations and investment firms get on track, but I have yet to see or hear how this plays out in the public sector, so I was just hoping you guys could offer a little more insight into that. Thank you.
Floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks, Hijazi. So starting with the first question regarding building materials, or actually materials in general, because it's not only buildings that are causing the urban heat island, but also the pavement services and other elements in the built environment. So that's something that we are tackling in two ways. First of all, when we speak about the city planning strategies, trying to invest more into collecting data of how these urban heat islands are being created in the first place. So basically, in one of the projects that we are working on, placing sensors in certain areas with the cities where we can see that the heat levels are really high, in order to capture two pieces of information. The first one is actually how that heat is generated, in which time and in which, like I would say, mode. And then the other element is what type of human behavior that is articulated in those certain peak times, because it's very, very important that we associate these, let's say, indices and numbers with the human or the level of the human impact, and as well as how do we respond to it. Another very interesting also project that I would love that everyone gets to explore it, which is basically an app that has been launched last year with a number of cities, but one of the key cities I would say have been leading on that effort is Athens, where they have, because basically they've launched their urban heat strategy, but also have assigned what they call the resilience heat officer. But what they have done together with other cities is actually working on developing an app that it's called Extrema, which is basically the word extreme, but if you just change the letter the letter E into A, and it's called Extrema Global. If you just look it up in your apps, you will find that one. What is really, really interesting about this app is that it provides you at the city level. So if I'm, for example, mapping the city of Riyadh, it would tell me where are the hotspots within that city, where are the cool areas that I should be heading to, so, and in particular cycling. So here we are moving from the level of just impact, but into action, and how that links into transportation and mobility elements. And it tells me exactly where would be these pathways, and also adding into that if there are certain fountains or areas where I can stop in and maybe fill up my water bottle. So that's on the health sector. I was just jump very quickly to the gentleman's question about the TCFD. The TCFD is actually the recommendations that we are following as part of the ECLA CDP track. And it's a platform where cities get to register, and we support them in the mechanism of how to report on their data, and as well as on the disclosure. So on annually basis, they are supposed to be disclosing on this climate data that they are developing. But what is very, very important on this element is not just the data that's being shared, but how that data is benefiting the city financially, because that leads into investments into projects. So the very recent project that we have just signed together with the EBRD, which is basically the use of the climate disclosure data for the city of Warsaw on how to actually develop their climate adaptation plans. So if you get to see the benefit of the data disclosure, then that cycle gets to fill in, and adding into that the private sector, which are automatically already as part of this process.
Thank you.
Do you have another question? I think looks like so.
I think we have another 2 minutes, so either we can take another question or can respond to the existing questions, but we need to vacate the stage in 2 minutes max.
I would.
Please, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting presentation. My name is Suryandaru. I'm President Director of Indonesia Nanotechnology Center, Indonesia. And we are developing a smart material flow infrastructure. And right now for anti-heating, anti-corrosion, and we implement our technology to our nation to protective long-term asset protection for the nation. Did you ever hear and did you ever use nanotechnology for the infrastructure for your case, for your experience before? Thank you.
Okay, so just playing back the question to make sure so you're asking whether we got any examples of use of technology for long-term infrastructure protection. Is that the question? Is it?
Actually, I mean nanotechnology, smart material technology.
Smart materials.
Smart material.
The materials, okay,
Exactly.
sorry, yes. Thank you for the question. So we are, this links to the previous question about materials. When you're thinking about choice of materials, there's a number of things that need to be considered. You know, like extreme heat is one. thing, but obviously then, the durability in the long term, and then also the embodied carbon. So I think when we now choosing our materials for building or retrofitting, I think the choice of material needs to be informed by multiple criteria. So it's not just about the, protection in the long term, durability, but it is also about sustainability, it's also about, so it's, and this is what we're trying to do. I mean, trying to identify examples of materials that have been actually locally sourced, but then also serve as resilience, enhancing the resilience and protecting in the long term, but also can be used to retrofit quite easily. That's the kind of short answer, I guess, in response to your question.
Yeah. Yeah, if I may just add, I mean, we're talking specifically about materials with regards to urban heat island, but obviously there are many other solutions that are beyond the sort of the materials itself. It's about the urban form, it's about land use planning, where do we put our roads versus where do we put our walkways, and where do we place our buildings, and all the urban fabric, basically scale and grain and typologies and shading, and all these elements are all sort of put together, then help us either improve the situation and reduce urban heat island effects, or reverse that. So there are lots of strategies to deal with urban heat island, and we recently at Arab launched a tool that has lots of data from across different cities that maps essentially urban heat points across different cities and suggests solutions, and shows in a simulation sort of the impact of implementing some of these solutions on the built environment. So it's another planning tool essentially. I'll leave it at that. I know we're out of time. Thanks.
I do want to continue the conversation indefinitely, but we do need to vacate the stage now, so I'm very grateful for your interventions. Thank you very much. Can we get some applause for our panel, please?
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So, yeah, I hardly can see. So anyway, nice to be here with you. And now we are going to speak about nature. And as you all know, if you just like close your eyes and think about very nice landscape, it definitely will be about nature. Just I wonder, do you imagine cities, infrastructure building as a good scene would you like to see? If yes or no, that's exactly what we are going to discuss now. So happy to introduce our panelists. The first one, Amira Ayoub. Amira is the MENA program lead for the Green Building Council. Can we get the next slide, please? Yep, thank you. So Amira is the head of the MENA program at the Green Building Council. Welcome, Amira. Our second panelist, Dr. Mahmoud Al-Sorf. Dr. Mahmoud is a Senior Advisor Sustainability and Climate Action at Jacob. Welcome, Dr. Mahmoud. Welcome, Dr. Mohammed. And our panelist and my neighbor as well, Katja Eisberner, which is the director at the Guidehouse. Welcome, Katja. So we are going to start our panel, firstly, by a short speech by Dr. Mohammed Al-Sorf. And afterwards, we are going to have a fruitful discussion, hopefully, with our esteemed panelists. Dr. Mohammed.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Good afternoon. Thank you, first of all, for having me and inviting me to be on this distinguished panel. My name is Mohammed Al-Sorf. I'm the Senior Advisor of Sustainability and Climate Action at Jacobs, founder of the Sustainable Professional Association for Saudi Arabia. Basically, the panel we're talking about today is going to be focusing on nature-based solutions for infrastructure and how to overcome the difficulties we're facing today with disasters and climate conditions that are really not at the moment being able to be predicted as well as we hope to have it. So basically, utilizing nature-based solutions is the issue of utilizing from its name, nature. So instead of building concrete structures using that concrete forest that we live in to really manage stormwater, manage the climate conditions that we're having, the disasters, transition that to a nature-based solution. So issues that we face, such as climate mitigation, is crucial to using nature-based solutions. Quite recently, Prince Mohammed bin Salman, Crown Prince, has announced the roadmap for the Saudi Green Initiative, which will launch from 2024 by utilizing nature-based solutions to implement the Saudi Green Initiative up to 2030. So it's very crucial that the nature-based solution approach for infrastructure is at a high level scale and from a top to bottom approach. It should be cost effective. It shouldn't be complicated. We should also implement stakeholders together. So the issue basically is to develop an infrastructure system that is basically dependent on nature instead of man-built environment. And I think in the first panel we discussed, that was discussed briefly. So issues that nature-based solutions will resolve, for example, heat island effect, cost effectiveness, wellness, and health for human beings to utilize the infrastructure as well. So utilizing materials, for example, is key to that success as well. So I think we'll have that in detailed discussion using that.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Mohammed. So I would love to start our discussion here with you, Amira. You know, like looking to the history, we always are getting inspired by nature. Everything we have created is inspired by nature, almost. So I really wonder, how can the infrastructure system get inspired by nature? How could we integrate nature in the infrastructure system?
Thank you, Nadi. Well, first of all, I would like to give a brief introduction about the World Green Building Council. For those who are not familiar, the World Green Building Council is the largest local, regional, global action network. We are working to decarbonize and create sustainable built environment for everyone, everywhere. We have more than 77 green building councils. We are happy today that today is the day actually to announce that we will have an affiliate partner in Saudi Arabia. So I would like to seize this opportunity to announce this. And we also have more than 46,000 members worldwide and 60 plus partners. Talking about getting inspired from nature is so much important at the moment. And when we think about the MENA region is so diverse. We have the Gulf region, we have North Africa. We all share the same arid climate. But when you think about it, we don't have nature in our daily life. Our kids don't go out. We don't have nature in our cities. And to be inspired by nature, let's think about the biomimicry, for example, approach, or the biomimicry, which biomimicry is how to mimic nature, how to learn from nature and natural systems. So if our cities is working towards creating models that are mimicking the nature and natural systems, like, for example, the forest. Let's look at the forest, or let's look at the tree. It's not like one element working by itself. It's about the interconnectedness of the whole system. So I think creating cities that are inspired by nature is so important, especially when we think about climate change mitigation, like integrating nature, reducing heat island effect, cooling up through creating green spaces. So I think biomimicry is so much important to look at it. And I do remember a few years ago, we were working in Egypt, in St. Catherine. We were working with the Bedouins to create a community center. And during that time, we spent a whole week with no phones, with nothing. And we learned from them about how they are working in nature in harmony. And I do remember when we were looking, we were a group of designers and students and young professionals. When we were looking at everything around us, we were thinking about how we can learn from what's happening or what's going on around us from the living organisms. And I realized that there is a caddisfly larva. One of the Bedouins told us about it. They call it the engineer. It creates its materials from its home, shelter from the local materials that they have. Some designers, actually jewelry designers, get some jewelry for it and it creates its home using jewelry. So how our cities can learn from this, and that actually inspired us a lot to work on something like that. So I think at World GBC, this is what we are trying to do, is to spreading the word about circularity, because nothing in nature is wasted. So learning from this approach is so much important, and I do invite you all to look at all biomimicry principles.
Thanks a lot, Amira. So actually, Amira, just to add to what you have mentioned, without desert, we couldn't have forest. So we do have nature. So just to add to what
Not in our cities.
Okay. So now coming to you, Dr. Muhammad, and as I know you are like in your daily work, you are working with developers and infrastructure developers. So picking up from Amira, what just have mentioned, how could we really have a move from no net lose to nature positive? And how could we push for having developers adopt these concepts?
Excellent question. Thank you very much. I think, yeah, definitely there's a push towards achieving sustainability in the infrastructure industry by developers and contractors and consultants. And the good thing about it is actually the project owners are now pushing forward to it. So like, for example, you have Red Sea Development, NEOM, Amala, all of those giga projects are actually pushing for infrastructure that is within the nature-based solutions. So they're shifting from the issue of just making, ends meet, making profits, towards really making a positive impact on the environment. So Red Sea Development, for example, the project they're developing, they're actually restoring the habitats, and they're not just building on islands where they conserve the islands, but they are actually taking what's there and rehabilitating it to be, be able to be visited. Birds migration will pass by, turtles will nest there, and so on. So that's one key example of why those projects are going to be playing a key role in the world and be case studies that will follow for generations to come. Biomimicry, of course, is a key aspect that developers and contractors need to follow. At Jacobs, for example, there's a project that we call Beyond Baseline. So we identify what's the baseline, but we go beyond what really needs to be developed and actually tackle the climate change effects head on and identify what the government really is looking forward to. As I said previously, that Prince Mohammed bin Salman has announced a roadmap for the Saudi Green Initiative. So it's all focused on nature-based solutions. So all developers now will shift towards that initiative to really focus and go with that train where it's heading. So if you're not on that train, you're missing the opportunity.
This is really great. So I can imagine lots of NBS projects coming on the way in the kingdom and the region, which is amazing. So now, how could we include these NBS? The question for you, Katia. How could we include nature and the role of nature? Like 2 days ago, I have a discussion with my energy lead here, Luciano, about cooling. And we were really discussing what is the role of nature and how could we bring nature into the cooling systems.
I'm Katja Eisbrenner. I'm a director at Guidehouse, but I'm also the director of the Cool Up program, which is actually supporting here in the region, Jordan, Egypt, Lebanon, and Turkey on upscaling sustainable cooling solutions. And maybe just to put the dimension why cooling is important, it's really impacting our health, as we heard also before. It's within the cities, and we're also expecting a huge increase, a 5-fold increase, which has an energy impact, but it also has, of course, an environmental impact because of the refrigerants that are used in these cooling devices, and specifically when we're looking at the building sector in air conditioning. And of course, that's an area where we're looking because there's what we call natural refrigerants, CO2, propane, they're actual natural refrigerants that you could use, which have a positive impact because they have a low global warming potential other than the synthetic ones. But also you can look at the demand reduction. So when you build a house, there's a lot of historic experience also, like how you use existing functions like maybe not nature, but you use white color and not you go maybe with other colors. There's a lot of historic elements. But also wind. There's a lot of examples, specifically here in the region, where if you are smart on how you use your wind corridors within the cities, but also within the ventilation of the house, you can actually reduce the demand of the energy and therefore also have a very positive effect. Or water. I think water is the river, and I think we can come back to that. There's a lot of elements in that as well.
Definitely, Katya. So actually, I would say that that was very positive from the three of you. And this makes me asking, okay, what are the barriers? What are the challenges? Because definitely there are like unavoidable barriers we have. So the question for you here, Amira, speaking about all of these opportunities, now we think about what kind of barriers. While you are designing for a city or infrastructure, while you are constructing for cities and infrastructure, what are those unavoidable barriers and how could we overcome it? Can you give us like a concrete example, for instance?
Thank you, Nadi. Well, the barriers, or the challenges, this is something that we've been working on in MENA region, especially this year. I think the first thing is mindset. We need to change the mindset. We need to raise awareness. We need to let people know that what we are talking about is impacting their daily life. We are not just a group of people who are like working on something that is not that is irrelevant to people's daily life. But I think it's also on us. How can we reach more people? How can we reach more audience? How can we have a hall full of people at this moment? I think we need to work together to invite more people to listen to us and to work together. This is what happened this year. We decided this year at MENA region to create roundtables and workshops, something similar to what we've been discussing this morning. I think, again, reaching out more people and creating a community conversation can take us there as well.
Definitely. So more engagement for real actions. So now coming to real actions, some of these examples you have mentioned, Dr. Mohammed, are some nature-based solutions have been implemented in the kingdom. So would love to hear like one example, including the barriers of this example.
Yes, definitely the barriers are, difficult to overcome. For example, the projects that we are involved in, first of all, there's the difficulty of engaging all of the stakeholders to reach a decision or to reach a consensus. Quite typically, you're finding the projects, everybody's working on a silo. So they're different, departments, especially in these giga projects, working, separately and engaging, their own objectives and their own KPIs. So one aspect that we find that difficulty facing is really engaging all of the stakeholders together to find out, what are the solutions, especially the nature-based solutions for infrastructure projects. The second is basically funding. So some of the projects, for example, NEOM is basically, heading towards that initiative and, opening it for investors to come and build with a NEOM and the line project, for example. So there's a big obstacle there for funding, and not just any funding, the funding that would be appropriate for that specific aim where it's a sustainable project. So green loans, green funds, and so on. So it's not just about finding any bank that can give you a loan or investor, but also they're very cautious about how that fund would help the project in different ways. The final objective I want to focus on is really the capacity building and the knowledge. There's multiple, spectrums of people working on this project, but they are either, from an old generation where they are used to work on that kind of specific, the non-nature-based solutions, the traditional way, or you have the young people who are lacking that capacity, that senior level knowledge and sharing, for example. So we find that as a difficulty, a main barrier to really disseminate the knowledge and know-how to all of the stakeholders.
This is amazing. So actually, we also would love to hear from our audiences, but before we go to them, Katya, I have like a final question for you. So, ecosystems are different from country to country, from city to city. All you have lots of nice landscape, I can imagine. But like my question here, what steps are needed to place nature and climate consideration as a priority in the region while planning for infrastructure?
Yeah, thanks a lot. I would like to come back what you said about the capacity building. I think that starts if we look at the governance level of the government level, we heard about the national climate action plans. In the space that we work, we're developing national cooling action plans. And then we have national adaptation plans. So I think this is all very important, and that comes where the collaboration comes also at the different ministry level, because we're working across sectors. And cooling is a perfect example. There's no cooling sector. Cooling is needed in various sectors, specifically when it comes to infrastructure. So that's where we see, I think, on that level, that cooperation is needed, and then, of course, a consideration with the other departments. And then also where I think important is the regional aspect and really the learning, so that some countries have experience with certain activities and also bringing that to the forefront. For example, in Jordan, they have an economic modernization vision, and they use the Kula program to integrate that, because it also will have not all, as you say, like job effects, economic effects. It touches base on it, and then when you come to the very implementation ground, you need the architects, you need the builders. They need to understand how to do it to also have a difference. So that brings where the capacity building is needed on all the various levels, and that's, I think, an importance for priority setting.
Amazing. I can imagine one of our urban planner here would be happy to hear that. So now we are opening the questions for the floor. So please, if you have a question, I hardly can see, raise your hand. Okay, I can see you. So.
Thank you very much. I think it's very interesting and very important issue, but I believe we should really focus on education at the childhood level, on raising the awareness of the meaning of nature and preserving nature, and this is something which we don't see a lot in our curriculum. The other thing is the legislation, the rules and regulations regarding preservation of nature in the local communities, because unfortunately there is maybe lack of coordination between what the community sees as a nature and what the management authority see as a benefit for the urban development. That leads sometimes to the destruction of important natural areas in the community. So I think these are issues which I would like you to tell us how we can organize it and make it more useful.
Yeah, I can imagine, Amira, you would love to.
I would like to add about the children, and because this year we've been working with our green building councils in MENA region and our partners, and as I said, creating circular conversation was pretty interesting. We started to think about how we actually this year we were working on, or we are working on creating the MENA net zero readiness framework. Everyone is talking about net zero. We wanted to know how we can be net zero ready, if we can be net zero tomorrow morning. So it was pretty interesting to see that the outcome of the conversation is focusing on children and youth while we were talking about net zero. And one of the projects, because we wanted to see our conversations coming up to action, one of the great initiatives that was one of the outcomes of our conversations and workshops is a group of our green building councils from Emirates, Egypt, Lebanon, and one of our partners created a Green School Alliance project where they can focus more with the children and the students and the teachers to understand more about the climate change and its relationship with the built environment. How can we respect nature more? How can we learn from nature? So I think what you're saying related to the students and the children and young generation is so important, because they are going to be facing what we're doing to the planet right now. And I'm happy to see that this is coming to projects on the ground. Actually, I'm inviting you all. We have Ibrahim here, who is one of the leaders for this project from Lebanon, GBC, and Andor. Reach out to him. They are doing some great work, and they are going to work with younger generation for this.
Thanks a lot, Amira. Do we have further questions? Yeah.
Hi there.
Is it a hand? Yep, please. Okay. Yeah. Catherine, yeah.
Catherine Cohn, Director of Sustainability at RCU. I completely agree from the awareness perspective that over the long term, children should be the focus. Right now, though, as we are developing projects on the ground, is there an awareness program, or have you a sense of the readiness of the local construction supply chain to be able to implement nature-based solutions on the ground, because what we're facing right now is a bit of pushback, of course, from them, because it would be a change from the status quo and how they currently implement infrastructure projects. So is there any experience that you guys can share with us about how to prepare the contractors to be able to take on this different approach to infrastructure?
If I can take that question. And in fact, RCU is one of the projects we're working on at Jacobs, and definitely there's as I said, there's a gap in the markets from contractors to really build based upon what the client is doing or wanting and what the consultant is providing as plans and guidelines. So there's a need for the consultant to actually work hand in hand and handhold the contractor to really develop that, to reach the goals of those projects, for example, the RCU projects and the Al-Ula development. So the issue is really that, there are different entities, government entities that control these contractors, for example, the Saudi Contractors Authority and the Saudi Council of Engineers. And those entities are being approached to reach that goal of acknowledging that there's a gap in the market. There's a need for workshops. For example, there's the ISI program, the Envision rating system. So that's one of the systems that really tackles the infrastructure from a sustainability perspective. And that's where consultants' jobs is actually extended beyond their role to really kind of reach on the contract as well.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Mohammed. I guess Katia would love to add something.
Yeah, I would like to complement on a different aspect. So when it comes to the natural refrigeration technologies, they also need newly trained technicians, because you have specific safety aspects that you have to do. What we're doing here in the KULA program, we're working with associations who are very interested, because they also have an interest, the industry has an interest to bring this into the market, and that's where the interplay also with the industry, the finance, and the governments is really a key to that. And that's bringing them, as you said before, and also cooperation at the round table, and let them actually speak and provide the space. That's very important.
Thanks a lot. And unfortunately, we have to end our session now because we're ending with 10 minutes for our next panel and final one. So thank you so much for listening to the panelists, and I appreciate a clap for them. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Put this somewhere. That's all right. Thanks.
I was told to sit on chair number 3, so I'm sitting on chair number 3. We're going to have 3 of our panelists back with us today for a free-flowing session, and I hope you can help me with it as well with questions. We're going to re-welcome Amira Ayoub from World Green Building Council, Ghaith Tibi, leading sustainability with Arab in the MENA region, and Nuhal Tinai, specialist in cities with a wealth of experience. Thank you. So the last session is about the nexus of nature-based solutions and sustainable transport. And I think to start with that, maybe I'll ask for a quick definition from each of the 3 panelists of what is actually sustainable transport and what are actually nature-based solutions. So 1 minute to answer this question, please. We'll start with Amira.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Well, nature-based solution is mainly about integrating nature in our cities and how we can see it working to for climate resilience. How can we see it helping us to mitigate heat island effect, cool our cities, create green spaces for our communities. So it's mainly about integration of nature in our cities, like also creating green corridor. And it needs a scale. Mm-hmm. It shouldn't be only about having small interventions in building. That's why it requires a deep collaboration from city plannings to architects to designers to everyone involved in the process.
Thank you, Amira. Ghaith, your answer to the 2 little questions, please.
Sure. So I guess I'll start with nature-based solutions. So essentially, they're using the natural systems to deliver services that we need in our cities, be it cleaning water, be it cooling spaces, be it water supply, be it dealing with flooding, be it dealing with rainwater. Essentially, it's copying and extending nature into our cities so that nature can deliver those services that it does deliver anyway naturally, but we want to bring those solutions or those services into our cities. So that's very briefly definition. On sustainable transport, I'll say it's sustainable for me is a quality. It's not a standalone thing. So it's really sustainable transport is doing transport in a sensible way, in an economical way, in a way that takes into account the social aspects of our cities, the economics of our cities, and the environmental aspects of our cities. So it's a quality rather than a standalone thing.
Okay, thank you. Naha, please.
Okay, so building on what my two colleagues here have mentioned, I think with nature-based solutions, it's basically the mechanisms that we apply in order to protect, sustainably manage, and restore the ecosystems to protect the people, because the whole mechanism of nature-based solution was built on the fact that we cannot build infrastructure in the same old ways, because with the impact of flooding, heat waves, and the different natural hazards and the extreme impact of climate change, it's the fact that we need to go back and see how these ecosystems need to be restored and minimize the loss and damage. Now, linking that into sustainable transportation, the word transport, it's coming from the fact of moving from one point to the other. So whether we are moving people or we are moving equipments, products, so that fact of transit and from one point to the other, if it's sustainable, that means that we are moving with the minimum amount of greenhouse gas emissions, but also in the most, I would say, effective way when it comes into economics, when it comes into businesses. So linking these three dimensions of the environment, the economy, and the social elements is very critical when it comes into transportation. And then how these two comes together, the nature-based solution and transport, that's, I think, the key for discussion today.
Thank you, Naha. I have a secret. Ghaith and I worked together for 5 years. So I'll just go back to something that we witnessed directly next to our offices and then ask you, Ghaith, to share some of the lessons learned, I think, from our region. So our offices were in Dubai, and at some point, we see the sidewalks being ripped off and closed. And then at some point, we see a new lane of landscaping. And then a couple of months after, we see it again closed. And then we see a cycling lane with green. Maybe building on this example, Ghaith, can you share a bit of the lessons learned from the wealth of experience that you've had in the region on traditional mistakes we forget or we do when we develop, and then really what are quick fixes at the development stage to integrate nature to deliver sustainable transport options?
Sure. So I think the lessons learned are, well, I'll start by planning, and we do need to integrate the different elements. If we're talking, say, public realm, we do need to integrate all these different layers of the public realm early on when we're planning projects. The problem happens when some of this isn't integrated in the planning and then the design and then construction and delivery of those public spaces, and then it's an afterthought, it's a retrofit, which is very costly, very disruptive to people's lives, but also to the economy, because it impacts as well the economy. So that's the first lesson. It's got to be done at the planning stage and then reflected in the design, construction, and so on. Another element is to do with strategic planning. And now I'm not talking about individual developments across the city, but rather the whole city. Because at the end of the day, public spaces are connected. And if we have a cycling lane, it's not going to be just a stretch at the edge of a development. It's got to continue to the rest of the city. And so that's also very important, having citywide plans, strategies, that again look at the different layers of the public spaces, be it for pedestrians, be it for cyclists, be it for transport hubs, be it for public transit stations and stops and so on, and then roads as well. So again, looking at it strategically at the city scale is quite important. A third point I would say is also bringing together the different skills on the sort of the early on the project planning, because mobility is not a transport engineering issue that gets resolved by having transport engineers work on modeling and simulations and quantifying number of cars and so on and so forth, and then deciding how wide the road should be. That's a very, very narrow definition of transport sort of planning, if at all it is. So it's much more. It's got to have the planning, the urban planning thinking, the land use thinking, spatial thinking. It's got to have the public space designers, urban designers. It's got to have the landscape architects involved. It's got to have the utilities and infrastructure people, planners involved as well, because all these basically systems or layers that make up our cities are very, very intertwined, and each one of them contributes different inputs and therefore influences the output of what eventually we experience as people in the city will impact that very differently depending on the requirements. So I think we need to bring that sort of holistic perspective to designing, well, planning, designing, and then the delivery of public spaces. And the last point, very quickly, is on having in place regulations, policies, directives, guidelines that informs and helps developers, being private sector or government sector, around how to go about designing those projects. And because we know that knowledge does not exist everywhere, and we also know that sometimes we have developers who are driven purely by making profit, and therefore, even if they've had this thinking integrated at the very beginning, it gets value engineered at some point because it costs some money, and that specific developer is interested in making money at sort of the very early days. So there isn't a strategic perspective there, and that's where regulations come into place to make sure that none of these key components that influences the city and its fabric are sort of value engineered because of commercial reasons.
Thank you, Reis. So you brought on this critical point of integration and coordination, which really comes back to governance. And maybe, Naha, I'd like to come to you to maybe share some of the examples of how you've worked on building this coordination and governance, even if not in an org chart within cities that you work with, but perhaps through process and collaboration. How have you approached it? How have you worked with cities to really mature this integrated thinking to deliver sustainable transport, nature-conscious outcomes for a city? Thanks.
Okay, so we've tried to do that in different ways, or maybe different mechanisms. The first one, and it builds also on one of the key points that Khalid have mentioned, which is capacity building. Because the biggest question that when we come into implementing such principles, do we have the right capacities within the city that can really grasp these concepts and be able to transfer them from a concept into an actionable project on the ground? So the first element that we've tried to do in projects that are focused on nature-based solutions is basically first of all, mapping the key stakeholders, because again, it's a new arena. So who exactly within that governance structure of the city and the context of that specific city needs to be engaged. And then the second element is after we have mapped the stakeholders, engaging them, but also mainstreaming these understandings of the importance of biodiversity in a meaningful manner, and also making sure that these stakeholders are able to transfer that knowledge within their own context. Because by the end of the day, no matter how much information that you're providing to a number of maybe 10, 15 or 20, that element of learning, exchange, and the transfer of knowledge is very, very critical. So having a clear strategy of how that knowledge is going to be transferred, and most importantly, how is it going to be mainstreamed into policies and strategies? Because if it's going to go nowhere, then it's useless. The second element is the element of municipal governance, because again, in some context, cities had the capacity, but they needed more support in understanding how that could be mainstreamed in terms of legislations. So the work or the support that we've been working on more was actually focusing on the mapping, the planning strategies for the city. So looking into the gaps that they have within the transport sector, the urban planning sector, the energy, the health sector, the disaster risk management sector, and how these different sectorial, let's say, strategies fit together and try to connect basically the dots. Maybe it can be a niche area of action, but as long as it can prove impact, and we were able to actually measure the impact of these actions, then we can move on into a second level. The third area, which is the element of financing, and we've already touched upon that one earlier, but in nature-based solution in particular, what we have been working on is something that we call Cities with Nature, which is again another platform, and excuse my obsession about data, but it's data is everything. So basically it's a platform where it supports cities on reporting on their targets when it comes into nature-based solutions. And it's actually being recognized by the UN Convention on Biological Diversity and adopted at COP15 last year in Montreal. So that framework, having a global framework where cities can actually report, compare data, identify where are my gaps, and exchange knowledge from other cities on what actions do I need to take. So from there, we are also supporting them on these three key areas.
Thank you very much, Naha. So I think this is great in terms of capacity building and bringing the right stakeholders, and this is primarily from a government perspective. And I think I personally have worked in cities where the transport authority is responsible for identifying the width of the sidewalk, but then the landscaping department is under a municipality and they decide how much they want to put in terms of green area, and then another department within the road transport authority will decide where the cycling lane. So really what Aghaith, you mentioned about this like city-wide continuity, and then Noha, this capacity building within the government entities to collaborate and then create these layers is critical. Amira, maybe I'd like to go back to you. What you do, what the World Green Building Council does superbly is really engage the private sector as well in building this knowledge and then becoming an ambassador for best practices. Can you talk a bit about how you've worked specifically in the MENA countries and cities to create this greater awareness of the role of nature-based solutions in creating better connected, healthier cities, and the role of private sector in delivering that?
Thank you, Jamila. The thing is, we are still in the beginning. We are still in the very early phase, but we are happy that we started, and we started to work. We started to think together. And as Dr. Noha said, it requires a systemic change. We need to unlearn and relearn. And I think this requires a deep collaboration where the private sector is working with the government. For example, I would like to go again to our MENA Net Zero Readiness Framework, because we realize that mindset is so much important to simplify our messages, to create a demand in our communities where they can feel that if I have nature-based solution in my city, this is important. For example, last year, the World GBC launched the MENA Regional Network. We launched the Sustainable Reconstruction and Recovery Framework for countries who are going through the climate disasters or wars. And we know that a lot of countries in the MENA region at the moment are suffering from things like that. How can we bring this conversation around nature-based solutions or net zero to people who are having financial disaster or war or earthquake like what happened in Morocco? How can we bring this conversation? I think, again, we need to simplify our messages. We are still trying to figure out how we can do this. And I do remember last June, I met Alida, and I'm happy that she's here, and she was saying that we need to have, hi Alida, we need to have the courage to say that we don't know how to do it. We need to share. We need to share what failed, because this is important. We can't know, we can learn from our failure, and it requires courage. And I think one of the barriers in our mindset here in MENA region is our ego, that we can say that I wasn't able to make it. So I think it requires a systemic change in mindset. I think this is our biggest challenge. Tomorrow, actually, we are going to have this discussion for a session, because when we realize that we really need to start to create different perspectives, I think net zero, which is all over, the conversation is all over the place, is still challenging. So what about nature? Do really people understand the importance of nature? Are they connected to nature on their daily life? Do they feel and sense how nature is impacting their health and well-being? If so, I think they will think and demand and create like a market transformation from people to like from micro scale to macro scale. So I think this is how we are trying to figure this out. We didn't figure this out yet, but this is what we are trying to figure this out together.
Thanks, Amira. If I may add a couple of points of my own, I think the concept of nature, which is why the definition of nature is important. And I think when we say we haven't figured it out, I think it's more that we have forgotten. No, honestly, if you look at Farij, for example, the design of Farij, and the entire GCC, the Al-Ahya, Levant, they were designed before the AC, and everybody was walking. We were connected. And this is why I like the term of nature conscious design, so conscious of our climate, conscious of our nature. And I think when we talk, sometimes when we think nature-based solutions, we automatically think green, but there's brown and there's I don't know what the color of the sand is, like
yellow.
Brown, yellow.
There's blues.
There's many
ocean,
shades of sand coming, and ocean, mazboot. And I think relearning, so just simple things like human scale, we say human scale design, right? Where you actually just have shading from the buildings, etc., and then integrating a bit of local landscaping. I think these are the things that we need to relearn and re-embrace, rather than think that nature-based solutions is green. I know we have 3 minutes. You wanted to add something, or?
No, I just think that the element of awareness raising or that reshaping of understanding or building principles, something that I'm just quick observation for the last couple of days, and how that thinking, or let's say the conversations are going. I believe that this is something that needs to be embedded. So we've got the youth definitely on board, but I believe it's children as well, because that understanding is in terms of that social responsibilities, the actions that I need to take as an individual in the choice of my transportation, in the choice of what type of plants I'm going to grow in my backyard. So these elements matter, and connecting them together, you can see the impact at the wider scale of the city. So I think a more generational kind of change needs to take place, going back to education, awareness raising from the basics.
Thank you, Naha. Yeah, this concept of re-embracing culture at a young age is so critical.
Can I? Yeah, I just want to add here. I agree it's a complex challenge, and I agree we don't have answers to all the questions, but I think we have some answers, I would suggest. And I think going back to a point I made earlier today, which is about the specifics of the cities, and each city has a very different specifics to its context. And going back to the active players, the decision makers, the people who actually invest and therefore make decisions on what happens and what doesn't. I think those are few. They're not everybody. They're not the people, as in the whole community. They're very few. And I think working with those groups would be key. So I think we need to focus on those groups. And I think the mindset that needs changing, and that's again partly where potentially regulations could help with, is the orientation towards commercial benefit as the main driver of development. You know, some people refer to it as commodification of property, right? Turning property into a product that is sold for the purpose of making money, full stop. I think that approach to cities and the built environment is what I think is one of the key sort of reasons for building for the sake of making money, full stop, and nobody caring about how actually we as people are, how do we use the city and what are our experiences on a daily basis in those environments that are sort of being built for the purpose of making money. So I think that shift from, and that's again learning from the past, because in the past cities did not expand for the sake of selling products, i.e. apartments and buildings. Cities grew because populations grew and needed places to stay in, needed houses, needed markets. And so it was a natural growth. It wasn't about let's build some more units because we want to make some more money and then move on and build some more. So I think that's a fundamental sort of problem, I would say, because that is the root cause of why then things like nature-based solutions, good quality public realm, and so on and so forth, get value engineered out of lots of schemes. And even when they're not, they're kept in because they will increase the value of the property, and therefore I can then, as a developer, make more commercial profit. Not actually because I want to deliver a good quality sort of piece of the city. Obviously, I don't want to be generalizing here because there are developers who are doing great jobs. There are governments who are sort of pushing, and I think we are all aware of the initiatives that have been launched in Saudi Arabia and other parts of the region that are pushing for sustainable development. And I think we need to build on those top-down directions, regulations, strategies to do the mind shift bit. But again, I think the focus, again, we do need to do the conscious and, consciously raise awareness across the community, but I think we need to strategically focus on the root causes of those issues, and they, I think, are sat with decision makers, investors, and their mindset around commercial profiting, basically.
Thank you, Ghaith. I see 0. I see 4 zeros in front of me, but do we have time for questions? I'm looking at Higazi. We do. Okay, any questions?
Thank you so much. This is Engineer Hibatiru, Sustainability Manager, RCO. I have a question regarding Montreal platform. Did you upload on this platform the sustainability KPIs so the cities can do real gap analysis when they compare their current condition with this KPIs and they plan accordingly? Thank you.
So yes, exactly. That's what this platform is meant to be. And then once the cities report on those KPIs, then they will be able to disclose on what are the results that they came up with, what are the risks and gaps that they're facing. Then they can prioritize that in their action plans.
Is that available to the public, or is it only for members of ICLE?
Well, it can be open not only because our network is member cities and what we call network cities, so cities who are associated with projects, not only members, but we are definitely opening the door for cities from MENA to come on board and support them.
Open invitation. Okay. Any more questions? Any final comments from the panelists?
I just like to add on what Ghaith said about creating a commercial benefit or creating a business case. I think this is one of the things we really need to focus on, is considering natural capital as one of the things that we are considering, because nature is a resource. It's a financial, economic, social, and it impacts human health and well-being. So I think creating more business cases definitely will drive the movement, and we really need to see this coming, because I think when people see it, they will go for it and they will ask for more solutions like that. Thank you.
Thank you, Amira. Thank you, Ghaith. Thank you, Naha. Thank you to everyone with us. We're closing the panel. Thank you very much. Guys. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, It's difficult to really follow up on the amazing words, the amazing panelists that we had the honor of hosting today. We talked about infrastructure, we talked about the role of cities, we talked about national adaptation plans and the policy roadmaps and how from the top down they can help cities. We heard the panelists speak about nature-based solutions, how nature isn't just green, but is also the yellow, the brown, and the blue, how it is within our cities and adjacent to our cities, and how it can impact on multiple levels, be it in terms of how we manage temperatures, impact building materials, or redesign the way that we approach the cities. We talked about the capacities, the role of the market, and how dynamics such as decommodification affect it, and how nature can be used to value engineer the cities and really be used to feed into these dynamics and allow a better design for adaptation and resilience going onwards. I would like to thank you very much for joining us today. I would like to thank you on Climate Change for giving us the space, as well as the MENA Climate Week and the Kingdom for hosting us. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for the generous time that they gave us, and all of you for joining us. Thank you very much.